1 week to go. A couple things as we head into this final week of the session that I want to emphasize as priorities for me. Certainly there'll be the bonding bill and the supplemental budget bill and some other policy matters, but the couple that I don't want to overlook is one is that the House has passed a very strong bill on payday lending, putting some limitations on what these lenders can do to vulnerable Minnesotans, both in terms of limiting the interest rate, limiting the number of loans that can be made per month. The Senate bill is much weaker, and it is even questionable whether the Senate will consider this measure at all. So I want to urge the Senate leaders to put the House bill to a vote in the Senate and see whether legislators of both parties see if they're willing to stand up to protect the interests of the people of Minnesota rather than the economic interests of the payday lenders. And that's what it really comes down to. Conversely, on the other side, the House, from what I'm told, is reluctant to take up and have a vote on the campaign finance disclosure bill. This doesn't limit anybody's ability to exercise their First Amendment rights of free speech, and it shouldn't, but it does say that people have a right to know where the money's coming from, and that these interest groups all across the spectrum who have sources of funding that people are not aware of, that's people have a right to know. They're going to be bombarded by television ads that are clearly about influencing the result of an election. I mean, we don't see them in non-election times of year, so they may be, by necessity, just not advocating for a particular candidate, but the effect is very obvious, and that's obviously the intent. So I'm told that because of MCCL and the NRA's opposition, that they don't have the votes in the House to pass this. The belief is that they have the votes in the Senate. So I want to see a vote in the House. I want to make everybody held to account. Let's see who's willing to stand up and buck that kind of pressure for what's clearly in the public interest. Money is just increasing every campaign, and the U.S. Supreme Court has said it's free speech, so that's the rule of the land. But it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be complete disclosure. In fact, it increases the need for disclosure just because of the fact that it's going to continue to escalate. Thirdly, the bonding bill has a provision from the Senate side that would eliminate the rulemaking and create that requires sprinklers in houses, new homes above a certain size. The House does not contain that provision. That provision has no business being in a bonding bill. It's unrelated to the bill, and it's just an attempt to force me to accept something that I vetoed both in 2011 and 2012, 13, 12? 12. So I will veto the bonding bill if it has this provision in it. They can just know that right now. They can put whatever they want in that bonding bill, and much as I want a bonding bill, I will not have something rammed down my throat. So they would be well advised to leave that out. They want to put it in another bill. It's in a couple other bills, I'm told. As a policy matter, that's perfectly legitimate, but to try to ram it through on a bonding bill is just really out of line and unacceptable. With that, I'll be glad to respond to any questions.
Governor, on payday lending, the critics of the House's approach say that if the number of loans per year is limited, that will just push desperate people out of a legitimate or legal system into something more nefarious. What's your reaction to that criticism?
Well, when I was in the U.S. Senate, this issue came up, and I researched, and so this is dated by almost a decade, but the highest interest rate we could document was 1,123%. That's about as nefarious as it can get. Can people who are desperate be turned to something even worse, or go across a border where they're not saying yes? I suppose they can. But the goal here is to have people help people avoid that kind of trap where they're just constantly trying to take out another loan to pay off for the previous loan at a totally exorbitant interest rates. I had proposed in the U.S. Senate limiting the interest rate to 30%, and that failed the vote in the Senate, I'm disappointed to say. I proposed that in the legislation that's moving forward this year, and that was not adopted, but there's in certain situations, there are limits on the total interest that can be charged in the House bill, and I think that's well advised, and the limit on the number of loans. And I, hope we could have a way of identifying people who have reason, have need, have cause to exceed those limits, and work with them on the kind of underlying issues that cause them to get into those terrible predicaments.
Governor, you didn't mention medical marijuana. Is that a priority? Do you want a bill in the week?
Well, I hope to get a bill I can sign. I hope to get one that Minnesota Medical Association supports. I think it's very important. If the legislature is going to prescribe medical treatments for patients, then I think they owe it to the safety of the people of Minnesota to take into special consideration the views of the predominant views of doctors around the state. And I hope that they'll enlist Commissioner Ed Ellinger, who's a medical doctor, whose specialty is public health, who has a lot of experience in this. He was engaged with the House for some time and made a number of, I believe, improvements in their legislation, and I hope he'll have the chance to do the same with the Senate, and I hope they'll work out a bill that we can all support.
Are you involved in negotiations on that, or are you going to just sit back and see what they send you?
Well, I'm through Commissioner Ellinger and through my chief of staff, Jamie Tinscher, we were definitely involved and continue to be involved in the House side. We reached out to the Senate side, and Senator Dibble's been indicated his interest in working out something cooperatively together. So I'm hopeful that will continue, and if so, I think we'll end up with, I'm hopeful, with a bill that can be I can sign.
Governor, what is it about the Senate bill that you are reluctant to support? You've said you like the House bill, but what about the Senate bill?
Well, the Senate bill, I think they brought it down now, but they have 55 distribution sites around the state. Is it down to 30 now, 24? 3 for congressional, so 24. Now it's 24 sites, 3 in each congressional district, where they will have the legal authority to grow marijuana plants, and then and people who qualify will have the authority to buy and possess legally up to 2.5 ounces of leaf marijuana, and are ostensibly limited to quote unquote vaping. I don't know if anybody's vaped marijuana leaves. I have no idea, but I can't. It's just, to me, impossible to believe is that somebody's going to buy 2.5 ounces of marijuana and not smoke it, or not sell it to somebody else who will. I mean, it just defies common sense in my judgment. So, and plus you've got a distribution issue with the security of those enterprises, with the credentials of the staff who are dispensing it, and it counts as medical marijuana, but there's no doctors involved here. There's nobody other than the patient himself or herself assessing, what is the proper dose here, and what is too much, and should I get behind a car after I've had, whatever amount. So it really is. They've gotten very smart at doing using the words to make it sound, alternative treatment center, and some of these other pieces of language that just don't reflect what's really going on.
It appears that the Senate bill has more security provisions than the House bill does, however.
Well, the Senate bill has features that are preferable to the House, and and they'll go to conference committee, and where the Senate bill has better security, then I hope that will be included.
Governor, I just want to double check. Are you saying that you are open to some of the provisions in the Senate bill, or is the House bill as far as you're going to go?
Absolutely. I hope the negotiation here comes forward with the best of each bill.
Do you think there ought to be dispensaries, that many dispensaries, even 24?
The logistical problems of that is something that I don't think anybody has really devoted much time and attention to. The startup costs, I mean, the assumption is there'll be no revenue impact for the state to get these centers set up and operating, and I think that's optimistic. Some of them might do well because of their locations, others in more sparsely populated parts of the state I don't expect to break even. Then we'll have to see what the operating losses are and who's going to be, in the next legislative session has to take responsibility for those. Again, the more 24 centers means you have to have, I don't know how many, 6 employees per center. So you've got then what, 144, people out there who have various qualifications and the like. And to think that I go back to the prescription painkillers, Vicodin, oxycodone, which are manufactured by companies under tight restrictions. They're Schedule I U.S. government. They have to be prescribed by a physician, and that prescription has to be filled by a pharmacist and given to the patient with no refills. And that's as tight a control over an illegal substance. A legal substance that is tempting to be used illegally that we've been able to come up with. And I'm told by law enforcement and others, there's those pills are widely available on streets throughout the state. So if those tight controls aren't sufficient to prevent the pills from falling into the wrong hands, especially young people, especially people who are vulnerable, who are still developing, then just think that we can distribute leaf marijuana under much more much less restrictive conditions and not end up with something that goes farther. And you talk to, again, people who deal with kids, high school, even younger, who are hooked on marijuana, and it's a very ugly situation. Talk to people who criticize law enforcement for their position, but law enforcement is the one who will go out and respond to the accidents that happen because somebody's driving stoned, which is, they say, similar to effective intoxication. And so, I mean, there's just all these consequences out there. We want to help the people that need help. We want to do anything we can to relieve the pain and suffering of children and adults who suffer from diseases and afflictions that might be helped by medical marijuana, but we want to do it in a way that's not going to open up even more people to greater harm.
Governor, are you glad you raised the profile of this issue? You started the session saying you were against it, and then you met with the advocates and you were more open, and then you said to the Senate, stop hiding behind your desks. You've really raised the profile.
Well, that was the House and the Senate, even more than the House. They both took equal umbrage. That's the process. Yes, clearly it's an issue that's extremely important to many people, and to the testimony or the speeches on the floor, which I think were sincere and heartfelt, and bipartisan support. I mean, it shows that everybody has a desire to be compassionate and to do what's right for people who are in the terrible situations that they face. And so, what comes out of this is something that's going to help improve one life or save one life, then as far as I'm concerned, it's well worth it.
Governor, has the debate or the votes that the House and Senate have put up some pretty big numbers. Has that swayed you at all in this? The votes in the House and Senate, the large majorities, has that swayed you? And you mentioned the emotional debate.
Well, I'm going to do what I think is right for Minnesota. They vote, and then if it passes, then the executive branch has a responsibility to implement it. So I depend a lot on Commissioner Ellinger, who's got a big heart, but also has the medical training and the public health training to know what's ethical and what's not. What you cannot ask other physicians to do. They're not prescribing this. They're just saying that these people have conditions that qualify them under the law to be able to purchase marijuana. So, there's a big gap there in terms of the liability, and that's something we haven't, looked at yet. If this passes, I'll have to ask the Attorney General to look at that. I mean, what's the liability for the state if something goes wrong with somebody? All of those operational concerns, the cost, whether it's going to be, can be financed. So Colorado's pointed, I guess Colorado makes money off of, but they legalize it for everybody. And in fact, it's interesting, the governor of Colorado, a Democrat, Hickenlooper, asked if he would advise other states to follow in Colorado's footsteps, and he said I would advise them to wait for a couple of years and see what happens here. So that's not a ringing endorsement of the approach that they've taken, which started as legalizing medical marijuana, and then from what I'm told, at least by some, the breakdown in the control over that system was such that they decided they would probably just to legalize it and make the best of it, make the money off of it, rather than continue to deal with the failure of the controls over just the medical aspect.
It sounds like that's the direction you're going. You would not sign a bill unless you're satisfied that the security and controls are in place?
To the extent possible. I mean, we'll learn from experience, but I think the House bill with the more limited distribution and the limit to pill form or capsule form is much more likely to be able to be controlled and used appropriately by the people for whom it's intended.
Are you prepared to veto?
I'm not going to use that word at this point, but anything is on the table. I guess I did use it earlier on the sprinklers, but my goal is to come, in this case in particular, to come up with something that has broad acceptance in the medical community, enough at least neutrality in the law enforcement community that obviously has the political support here. We can sign. I can sign it, and we can do the best we can to implement it well.
Do you think intractable pain patients should have access? They would under the Senate.
I don't think I'm not qualified. I think the legislature is qualified to decide who medically qualifies for something whose effects aren't established except anecdotally. I mean, that's why they do extensive research studies and their clinical trials, with various medicines before they're made available to the general public, so that even doctors can answer those questions. And even, you said before, it's been a long time since we had the catastrophe with thalidomide, where it was tested and it actually was, I'm told, beneficial to some people, but it had these catastrophic effects for women in the early stage of pregnancy, and that wasn't detected. Well, they tightened up the procedures a great deal after that, and now we go to the drugstore, at least I do, and get a prescription filled, and I don't think about whether it's going to be safe for me or not if I follow the directions, and it's just that's something we can take for granted, which is great, which is the way we want it to be. So, this has not gone through that kind of scrutiny, that kind of evaluation, and so we have testimonials from people, and they may well be true, but that doesn't mean that it applies to everybody.
Given all that, do you prefer the shorter list of qualifying patients?
I'm not. I want the people who need it and who might benefit from it to have access to it. So I'm not going to say one should be in, one should not. I don't have the expertise to make that assessment.
Governor, you're still hanging fire on a bonding bill that's going to be smaller than you ideally would have wanted, a spending bill that might be a little bigger than you ideally wanted. At this point, with a lot left out there, granted, what kind of grade would you give the work of the legislature this year?
Well, it's still in progress. I think the grade comes with the result at the end. So ask me in a week, 8 days.
Governor, on the supplemental spending bill, you've made your point clear that you want a smaller one. Should the lawmakers assume that you'll use your line item veto if you're not comfortable with the size, or will you also veto it if you think it's too big?
I don't know what's in it, to be honest. I mean, we don't know specifically. We have some idea on the House side of the bonding bill, and I think they're still waiting, the last I heard, for the Senate to respond. So we don't really have a fix on where they are, in agreement and not, and we hope to have expect to have a chance to, have input into that. On the spending side, we're not, I haven't seen the latest, side-by-side offers, so I don't know where they are and what the issues are. I said before, and I'll say it again, I'll bet that every one of the spending items is something that's much needed somewhere, that's totally appropriate and totally legitimate. It's just a question of what they all add up to, and my sense of what we need to do to make sure that the fiscal integrity of the state, which we've now re-achieved through some very hard work and tough decisions, is continued forward.
Governor, in terms of a bonding bill, are there certain projects for you that are an absolute must that need to be in there?
Well, we're going to go over that shortly because they've asked for that. And I'm not going to limit, I'm delighted that the downtown improvement projects are in. I believe it's imperative that Lewis and Clark be in at a significant amount, probably within the constraints of that bonding bill, can't be funded in its entirety, but enough to get the next season of construction underway past Laverne and Fort Worthington. And then I'll push, if I'm back, hard for another measure to fund that completion the following year. What I've stressed to the legislature is some of the projects that are, well, they've not been funded. I've proposed 3 times now the security hospital at St. Peter, MSOP. Twice I've proposed the intake facility at St. Cloud, corrections facility. None of those are projects that anybody goes home and, campaigns about unless they happen to live in St. Peter or, St. Cloud. But the people who work there, lives are very much jeopardized by the failures and inadequacies. And I've been at St. Peter, and I mean, you can't call that a therapeutic environment. It's just not. So to ask people to do the kind of work that they're doing in conditions that are just not conducive to that work, to me, is really unfair and impractical. But they're expensive projects, and as, again, with the limits on the size of the bonding bill, it makes it even harder.
Governor, what's your latest thinking on the bill that I think is in conference committee this week that would get rid of the electronic portions of the lottery? What do you have to see in there, and what's one of the disqualifiers for you?
Well, I'm still trying to make the evaluation that I set out a couple weeks ago. To what extent is this to protect the people of Minnesota from the additional ills of online gambling? And to what extent is it about protecting the vested economic interests of the people who already have a piece of the state's gambling pie and want to protect their turf? And that one, I haven't answered that question definitively yet, and that will have a lot to do with what I decide. I met with Mr. Van Patten, and his job is to maximize the effectiveness of the lottery so that it can generate as much revenues legally and ethically as possible, which will then in turn benefit the Minnesota environment. And it used to be Environment Economic Development, now it's Environment and General Fund. But the whole purpose of the lottery is to ask people to participate in something that somebody would say, I might agree, objectively is not in their economic interest to do so, but to do so because it benefits the state of Minnesota. So to say you can do it one way, but you can't do it another way, to me is a little disingenuous. I mean, there are some people who I'm told support the bill who just are opposed to gambling in any form whatsoever. And that's a principled position, and but that's not what this is about. This is about saying we'll continue gambling. We're just going to say it can't go in this way because the people who are financially benefiting from the way it is now want to keep it that way. What I guess is still in the Senate bill, the pay at the pump devices there. I mean, what that has to do with online gambling? That's simply protecting somebody's financial interests, and I think that's the wrong way to approach it.
Governor, do you think that the Bell Museum should be removed from the House bonding bill?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that the Bell Museum, $50 million, should be taken out of the House bill?
No, I know that the chair feels very strongly about that. I know she's worked very hard for a decade to have it funded, and has not been. I think they're negotiating. I'm told they're negotiating the amount of it. I mean, it's a good heritage of the university, and the question is, how does it fit in with all the priorities that are? I mean, we had over $3 billion of requests for the bonding bill, and most of them were really good, solid projects that needed and deserved to be funded. And so it's not a question of whether something deserves to be funded or not. It's a question of, how do you fit that in with the hierarchy of priorities, and the House has its, and the Senate has its, the DFL has its, the Republicans have it, and we need everybody to ultimately come together and nod their heads to pass a bill. So it's a very difficult task.
On a side issue, do you have a feeling about national popular vote in the compact?
I can make that argument either way. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. So it's not something I spend a lot of time on. I can make the arguments for it. I can make the arguments against it. But as long as the presidential path goes through New Hampshire and Iowa, it isn't going to happen. Who's the Phil Graham? Many times I felt sympathy for Phil Graham, but he came out in favor of a national popular vote, and he got one was the caucus? I guess it was Iowa. He got one delegate out of Iowa taking that principled, courageous stand. So I don't think anybody, either party, is going to take that on anytime soon.
Governor, would you veto a bill, the health policy bill, if it has a Clean Indoor Air Act ban on e-cigarettes in it?
No, I would not veto it on that basis. I said before, I agree with the goal of it. I thought the strategy was a bit overreaching for this session, but if that's the will of the legislature, I'm not going to. And I do strongly support the first section, which is putting restrictions on availability for minors. So with that in there, I would sign it or let it become law.
Governor, in light of in light of some of the criticisms you started out with, are you meeting regularly with the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader? And are all three of you sitting down and trying to work out the end of the session?
Yes, we met twice last week, and my staff is in daily contact with both leaders and with their staffs, and with the chairs of the bonding bill and the members of the conference committee, and same with the supplemental budget, and as we were on the tax bill as well. So, they have their own minds. That's what they got elected to do. That's their prerogative. But we certainly are in constant contact. I just had a voicemail from Speaker Thies this morning, and I'm going to respond to that. I mean, Senator Bach likes to text, so he and I text, and Paul and I leave voicemails, and it has the same effect. We stay in touch.
Are you meeting with Republicans on the bonding bill?
Not yet, no. I'm leaving that negotiation to the House and the Senate. I gave Representative Dowd a lift, or it was not my plane, but the state plane. We took from Brainerd down to Rochester and back to Brainerd last Friday evening, but we didn't negotiate the bonding bill. Some people thought I should, but.
What did you talk about with Representative Dowd for all that time?
Oh, we talked about pretty much non-political stuff, and he's a pilot, so he was interested. He went up for part of it to check out the pilots and talk with them about the flying. So, but it was very congenial, and we both had the same reasons for being in both places.
You've been a critic of using cash for building projects. Is there some flexibility in your position at this point, or is that a firm no from you?
Well, I think it's a mistake. I think the Republicans have illogically forced the DFLers into that. I mean, again, after we're talking about the bonding bill, to put an ideological limit, and I'm told, some of them expressed the view there should be no bonding bill. So we should do nothing to benefit the state of Minnesota through the public sector. And that's just an ideological extremism that I think is wrong and is very counterproductive. But that's the position they've taken. So I understand the pressure to get up to $1.046 billion through 846 bonding and $200 million cash. But the purpose of a bonding bill is you use cash to pay off the bonds that you make the capital investments through debt financing the same way corporations do. And we're told we should operate government more like a business. Well, we are. And Target or any other company that wants to expand its operations and had to rely on cash alone, its profits alone, wouldn't get very far. So they issue corporate debt prudently, and we rank 17th from the bottom in per capita state indebtedness. So we're very, very prudent in our borrowing, as we should be, as we will continue to be. But when you have low interest rates and high demand and the ability to pay for it, then you're foolish not to do it. Penny wise and pound ill-advised.
But if they send you a $200 million cash for building veto, would you be inclined to veto it?
I don't know. I haven't seen what it is. I haven't seen what's made up of. I expect they're all going to be good projects. It's just a question of whether I think that that's financially the sound decision to make.
You have no problem flying around even if you have some of these differences?
No, I mean we expect to have differences. That's small. That's democracy.
Would it be embarrassing to end the session with the Democratic governor vetoing bills from a Democratic House and Democratic Senate?
Well, for me, it'd be less embarrassing than signing them if I disagreed with them. I mean, that's the process. I don't mind disagreement. I don't think we're not. The goal is not to be in lockstep. The goal is to have a give and take and exchange and debate and disagreements and everything else. I mean, and out of that comes collective wisdom and the way the process works. So I can veto, they can override. I mean, that's the way the system's set up to work, and it's worked for however over 200 years very, very well for this country, and it's better than anybody else has been able to devise. So I honor and respect it, but I think that somebody once said, debate is the noise of democracy.
Anything else? What went wrong in the lake?
Just to show the injustice of the universe. The lieutenant governor had a guide who was a goalie for UND, goalie for North Dakota, and he took her out. She and Congressman Nolan each caught a walleye on the second cast, and then she got another one. They each got another one, and she got a perch in the morning. And I fished 2 hours from midnight to 2, and I fished from 8 to 11, and didn't get a nibble. And nobody on our boat got a nibble except one guy at night got I fished with Eric Magnuson and his friend Tom, I don't remember, Brown? He caught a 25-pound, 25-inch walleye, just proved that there are, it's possible. But in the morning, we even had the guide fishing, and none of us got a nibble. So what do? You put your line in the water, and sometimes you pull something out, and at least in my case, most of the time you don't. Thanks.
Thank you all.